When I was at ESPN, I was 26 years old. I was just starting out doing SportsCenter, and I had dreams of calling baseball games. And part of the reason why I did that is baseball is my first love. I'm an NFL Network guy now, but, baseball is my first love. And grew up loving baseball, and watching the Big Red Machine broke my heart. Broke my heart in 1976, sweeping my Yankees. And then suddenly here I am. That was 1976. Here it is now 1996. 20 years later, my dream job comes true. I'm on SportsCenter. And all I wanted to do was call baseball games, and I had an opportunity to do so. And I reached out to a colleague of mine for advice. Couldn't have been nicer. Gave me literally spent 15, 20 minutes on the phone with me, giving me advice on how to call games. And one of the reasons why I reached out to him is he's an all-time great. And then I got to work with him because I was the first voice, the studio voice of ESPN Radio, Major League Baseball on ESPN Radio. And I watched this man work along with Joe Morgan, one of the Big Red Machiners who broke my heart in 1976. And watching these two gentlemen together call games for ESPN Radio, but obviously they were best known for their work on Sunday Night Baseball, was an honor, and a feather in my cap that to this day is still one. Never will forget it in my career. So when Joe Morgan passed away this week, he's been on this show, and I think you tweeted out that interview earlier this week, right,
Yeah,
Chris?
I did.
When Joe Morgan passed away at the age of 77, I thought of this man and asked him to come on the show, and he's kind enough to do so. The great John Miller here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, John?
I'm well, Rich, and it was such sad news about Joe because, as you know, Joe seemingly had an endless well of energy. Mm-hmm. Nobody has had more energy than Joe. When we were doing Sunday Night Baseball, he was always flying into town from somewhere else. He'd been at somebody's charity event, helping them raise money for their charity, or somebody's charity golf tournament, or he'd been in Cincinnati doing business with things that he was doing there. I mean, Joe always had all these different irons in the fire, and but a lot of them were about raising money for his own charity for kids, the college scholarship that he had set up, or scholarships for kids who should be going to college, but who just didn't have the grades to get a scholarship, or maybe to afford going to college, things like that. He was always working not just for himself, but for other people, and then he'd come and do the games, and so then to find out that he had passed away, because when I had spoken with him, and we talked 2 or 3 times during the summer. He was recuperating. He'd had back surgery a year ago, and he kept saying he was getting better and better, and he could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that's as far as he went with it. And then all of a sudden, I wake up and I'm getting messages that he's gone, and it's like I was sort of in a state of disbelief. Joe Morgan, hard to believe, but I always remember the thing about Joe. I mean, he was a fiery competitor as a player. He was going to beat you, and that was it. And he had that cocky bearing of a base stealer. He was going to steal a base, and you couldn't stop him, and he knew that you couldn't stop him. And he admitted at that time that you had to be cocky to be a great base stealer, and he knew exactly how good he was. But at the same time, people didn't see the work and the hours of dedication that he put into it. We started working together, and Bill James, the stats guru, had come out with a book somewhere in that era, around 1990, called The Historical Baseball Abstract. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about all the different decades of baseball and the way the game was played at that time and the way it changed from one decade to the next. But he also came up with formulas to quantify players and how good they were from one era to a different era. And he'd take into account the way the game was played, the kind of ballpark the guy hit in, things like that. So when he gave his opinions about the best players of all time, the best second baseman of all time, they weren't his opinions. They were the results of the formulas that he had devised to try to account for all those variables so that you could make a comparison between, say, Joe Morgan in the modern era and Rogers Hornsby from back in the 20s. And I told Joe, we were starting to work together, I said, you know, in this book, Bill James made the case that you're the best second baseman of all time at your peak, even over Rogers Hornsby. And Joe says, well, that's ridiculous. How could I be better than a guy who hit .424 with 42 home runs?
Right.
Nobody's been better than that at any position. And so as time went on, he kind of every 3-4 years, I'd bring that up again, and just to see if maybe he was a little more amenable to the possibility that maybe he was the best of all time, which you'd think maybe he'd argue against Hornsby, right, and for himself there, but he couldn't see it. But I think the great thing about Joe was that he knew how hard the game was. And to hit .424, he didn't care what era you played in, that you had to be incredibly good. He says, how many 400 hitters were there that year again? Refresh my memory. And, it was just the one. And, that's what I'm saying. And 42 home runs in addition. So that's who Joe was. And so in that way, he was humble. And he moved into the television booth, and, he had the name. You know him since you were a kid because he beat up on your Yankees in '76. He was one of the great players of his era, a two-time MVP, won, 5 consecutive Gold Glove awards, a perennial All-Star. And every team he played on got better because he was on the team. And so his credentials were secure, his name was secure to get a big network broadcasting job. But he started in Cincinnati doing some local TV, then with the Giants, because he lived in the Bay Area,
right,
and did the local Giants games.
Well, I got to tell you,
he was learning his craft, and he wanted to know,
right,
can I be good at this? And he figured, as he was learning how it's done and honing his craft, then he kind of came to feel like, yeah, I could be good at this. And so ESPN came calling, and that wasn't the only offer he had. CBS was coming in to do the Saturday afternoon games the same year, so there were 2 new network affiliates coming in the same year, and they both wanted him. So he went with ESPN because he thought, well, it's prime time, and we'll go to all the ballparks, and so he thought that was going to be the more fun opportunity. So he took that, and I feel like he was a key. He did that for 21 years. We were together for 21 years.
That is amazing.
And nobody knows better than you, Rich, that this is not based on we were big Red Machine fans and we were Joe Morgan fans. It's a business. You don't last for 21 years at that level because they just have a nice feeling about you, and it kind of says it all about how good he was at it, that he was there all that time.
Well, you were a great team together, John. I got to tell you, my recollection, you didn't obviously know at the time because you were looking at the field, but I would sneak into the booth when I was fortunate enough to be part of the ESPN radio broadcasts and be at the World Series that you were calling with Joe. I would sneak into the booth just to pick up some tips from you, watching you and Joe together. And one thing that I noticed that I picked up on, and to be honest, that I started doing myself, and now it's become second nature, is when I broadcast, I talk to the person that I'm, who's in the room with me, as if that's the person at home listening to me. And I do that a lot. And I do that on NFL Network. I'm doing that literally right now, and I'm not even noticing it. But I do that because I watched you when you would call the game and set things up. You were talking to Joe. You actually moved your body and talked to him and gestured with him, towards him, and he would do the same to you. I was like watching 2 friends talk, but you were broadcasting a game. I saw that with my own 2 eyes, John.
Cool. Well, Well, I appreciate that, and
it was amazing.
The funny thing was, all these years since I think 2010 was the last year we did the ESPN games together. All the years since then, we would talk periodically on the phone, and occasionally get together, but mainly on the phone. And these phone calls would go on for 2 hours, 2.5 hours.
It's amazing.
And we were still talking to each other. And,
well, the Red Sox and Yankees are probably in the bottom.
About this, and so
the Yankees and Red Sox are probably in the bottom of the fourth by that point in time. 2.5 hours into your conversation.
The other thing was he was a trailblazer, because Bill White, I think, was the first African American play-by-play broadcaster in baseball.
Yep.
And he did a great job at it. Joe was the first African American baseball analyst on network television, and he did that for 21 years in prime time. So in that way, I think, because you look at the Ford C. Frick Award that the Hall of Fame gives out, I don't see any black play-by-play or color analysts on that list to ever have won that award. And I feel like Joe should already have won that award, and now it'd be kind of bittersweet if he wins it, that he's no longer around to enjoy it. But so that's Joe is a guy who, and he was fun, and I learned so much about the game from him. But you could argue with him, and he liked that. He liked to be challenged.
I was intimidated by that. I got caught into some of that too, John. When I first met him, I was kind of intimidated by him because he was opinionated. A guy who reminds me of him that I've worked with is Marshall Faulk, in terms of all-time great, always has tons of irons in the fire, has tons of opinions, will definitely go back at you, and is also just a great person to get to know, and is, frequently the smartest guy in the room. And he would let you know if you said something. I would make a point, in a conversation with him, and he would basically tell me, you know what you're talking about. And it would be kind of difficult for me to take that, but I didn't take. I could see just like he kind of liked the back and forth. He kind of digged it. John,
he did. And every city we'd go into, there'd be somebody who'd want to stop by the booth before the game to say hello. Movie actors, politicians, TV stars, you name it.
Yeah.
The one I always remember kind of fondly was Spike Lee, the great director.
Sure.
Walked into the booth at Fenway Park before a game, and he had come out with a movie a few months before that I thought was a great movie called I think it was called Inside Man. Did you ever see that with Denzel Washington?
Sure, of course.
I think Clive Owen, the British guy.
Yes.
And so great movie, and there's a little mystery to it, and tension and drama and whatnot. And so Joe introduces me to Spike Lee. I'd never met him, and I tell him how much I enjoyed that movie, and then Joe starts grilling him about how come you haven't started that Jackie Robinson movie yet, and Spike Lee is very defensive. He's like, well, I can't get the funding for it. The people are not stepping up, and Joe says, well, maybe you're not trying hard enough. Maybe I should go with you the next time, and you talk to these people. And I mean, he's
love
giving
it.
him like he's like as if Spike Lee works for Joe, Like, let me tell you, I know all about the movie business, and you're not trying hard enough, or whatever. And so he goes through that thing, and Spike Lee's kind of getting exasperated, trying to explain to him that
right.
I tried these people, I tried those people, and they just didn't come through with the money. And what can you do? You got to get the money to make a project like that, to do it right. And nobody wants to do it more than me. He says, yeah. And he says, another thing, I liked your movie Inside Man, or whatever it was called. He says, but you made a mistake when this happened and that happened. And don't think I didn't notice that. What?
That's Joe Morgan, right? That is such a great story, John. Hey, I wanted to have you on to tell all of these, and you're the perfect person to talk about Joe from the perspective of his other career, I guess is a way to put it. And And it also means a lot to me that I kind of had a front row seat for a few of those years in the beginning of my career, and I'll never forget it. So I just wanted to have you on to talk about it.
Well, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Joe a little bit. And it's still sort of unbelievable to me that he's gone, but certainly a very large legacy. And one thing that I'm happy about, and anybody who knew him, I think, would have to be happy about. We know he didn't get cheated out of life. He lived every moment to the fullest. That's for sure. And you know, I just couldn't believe the energy that he had. I said, don't you ever think that, Joe, you've accomplished so much that maybe every once in a while you should just go on vacation a little more often, and you don't have to take care of. You don't have to answer the commissioner's call, because the commissioner was always calling him, Bud Selig, and then now Rob Manfred. They ran things by him. And I don't think he was paid. You know, he wasn't one of those like Joe Torre or Frank Robinson later on, or you know, a former baseball guy who worked for the commissioner. He was friends with them, but they wanted to grill him a little bit and bounce things off of him. And so he was an advisor. The same at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And Joe would do things for the other Hall of Famers. He'd take the bullet for something that they were all complaining about. The last one that you may recall was Joe wrote a letter, sort of an open letter, that he thought the guys who were implicated in these steroid scandals and whatnot should not get into the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Well, he was what he didn't say was that all the Hall of Famers were sending him letters and emails and making phone calls to him, saying, if that happens, we're not going to the Hall of Fame. That'll be the end of the last time I go to Cooperstown, and so on and so forth. And so Joe just thought, well, instead of these great legends of the game having to go out in public and say that themselves, that Joe decided that he would just put this out there on their behalf. And he got a lot of flack over it, you know, but at the same time, it was like, I think they missed the actual point that he was trying to make, is that the Hall of Famers themselves. And so, I mean, Joe, to me, was just as big a legend as any of those people, but and yet he was the guy out there who was trying to do things to help them out. So a great man, a great American, and or as we like to say, #IMHO.
That's great. In your humble opinion, John Miller. Did you got the John Miller drop that we play all the time? Whenever we are all getting together, did you got that?
Which one, Rich?
You got that one? Remember he was here?
Oh, yes.
Here we go. This one.
Squad goals.
There you go.
I forgot about that one.
We say that all the time.
I never knew that was him.
I forgot about that.
You left a lasting legacy when you came in studio here years ago, John. But
yeah. Well, Rich, it's always fun to go on with #the GOAT, and I really appreciate your call.
Thanks the call, John. Right back at you. Really appreciate it. You be well, you and your family. That's John Miller, the great John Miller.